Despite his return to the F1 scene last season with AlphaTauri, now RB, Daniel Ricciardo's sole ambition is still to rejoin Red Bull. The team where he notched up 7 wins, including a Monaco Grand Prix victory. Not too shabby at all. But with the 2024 season now well underway, Ricciardo faces some serious challenges, which he certainly wasn't expecting when he patched things up with Red Bull last season. And with a slower than expected start to the season, even his place in F1 is now up for debate. With doubts about his performances so far, along with his future prospects, a big question is, what's next? Or an even bigger question is, will he have a drive in 2025? And if not, where does he go? Now, it's good to have Ricciardo back in Formula 1. He's a great character, immensely popular driver, he's pretty straight up in interviews. But here's the other thing. As of late, he reminds me of when you have a professional footballer who was destined for great things, looks very promising, but then has an almost career-ending injury. Sure, they return to the team with the same face, the same attitude, but they're just not making the same impact as before. In fact, it's like he's fading a little bit. But let's not forget, in his prime at Red Bull, this is the guy that beats Sebastian Vettel in his own backyard, and this is also the guy that gave Max Verstappen a rattling. So overall, he did at one stage have a lot going for him. Yes, he has made some poor career decisions over the years, siding with Renault, and then things not working out in McLaren later, but it is fascinating to think where his career could be now had he stuck with Red Bull for all these years. But so far, his time back at RB hasn't been what we hoped, and this also hasn't been helped along by a car which is fairly unspectacular as well. He struggled to match his teammate Yuki Tsunoda and has even had warnings from Helmut Marko saying that he needs to up his performance and move things along. Okay, Helmut, so if he improves, matches Yuki Tsunoda, that should be enough for him to keep a seat, right? Well, not exactly. Unfortunately for Ricciardo, who's at the ripe old age of 34, there is a pool of very exciting and very intriguing young talent bubbling away underneath him. And the most notable of this, I think, is Liam Lawson, who stood in for Ricciardo for 5 Grand Prix last year. And he does make you ask the question, is Ricciardo still needed? Is he future-proofing the team? And is he still the answer that they need? Because with the driver market being so wide open for 2025, this really does not help his case. He should be bringing a wealth of experience to the team and should be teaching Yuki Tsunoda a lesson or two, beating him on the regular, and from what we saw towards the end of last season and the start of this season so far, this isn't happening yet. Some would argue that the whole purpose of bringing Ricciardo back into the fold within the Red Bull family was to light a fire underneath Sergio Perez, who last year was, let's say, having a couple of troubles. And for a little while last year, with Sergio Perez really suffering with his performances, it did look like that Ricciardo might actually get a shot back at Red Bull. Because as we all remember, compared to Max, Checo was nowhere. And it's funny because when you look at this photo here of Max, Checo and Ricciardo all together, the awkwardness is just so palpable. If you had to look up the definition for third wheel on Google, this should be the picture to describe it. But the most crushing blow for Ricciardo's ultimate goal of rejoining Red Bull is that in 2024 so far, Perez is actually doing a very good job. Checo is second in the championship, fulfilling his job description to the absolute letter. And with the whole whirlwind of crap going on at Red Bull right now, Checo is actually the most consistent, stable person within that team right now. I mean, this time last year, who would have thought that would be saying that? Now, with the relationship between Tsunoda and Ricciardo looking somewhat fractured since the Bahrain Grand Prix and their car, the V-Carb 01, being the most oversold car in recent memory, the question is now, what are his chances moving forward? Well, it's pretty straight up. If he gets beaten on the regular by Tsunoda, despite his wealth of experience and all the weight he carries by being Daniel Ricciardo, Grand Prix winner, it's not looking good for him. Because right now, Yuki Tsunoda is Honda's man at RB. At least until Honda moved to Aston Martin, but you haven't heard that yet. So right now, he's not going anywhere, at least for a little while. But he does have a temper and a little bit of growing up to do, so perhaps that is one thing that Daniel Ricciardo could perhaps take advantage of, being a much cooler head within the team. But even if he does this, unfortunately for Daniel, the clock is ticking. Liam Lawson is sitting underneath him on standby and pretty much has a seat nailed on for 2025. And also the Red Bull door is beginning to close. So if he can't secure a drive for 2025, what next for Daniel Ricciardo? Now, for some drivers in this situation, they wind up in World Endurance Championships or Formula E. It's a pretty well-established career path. But Ricciardo, I think, is somewhat different to some of these other drivers that have gone this route. And that's why I think his future lies in the USA, whether that's IndyCar or NASCAR. I am a real American, fight for the rights of every man. Now, before we hear complaints about it's just turning left, blah, 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 look, as long as it's a motorsport using a real V8 engine and not using some electric dentist drill like we find in other motorsport categories, who cares? Ricciardo is a self-confessed NASCAR fan and has actually flirted with it from time to time in the past. He's test-driven stock cars in the past, he's attended races, and he's even paid tribute to Dale Earnhardt with that special helmet design. So there is that underlying interest there in him. Now, he said one of his favourite movies growing up was Days of Thunder. Now, I know that's not Shawshank Redemption or War and Peace, but that movie gets my vote every time. Now, whilst he was on the F1 sidelines for much of 2023, he admits he was approached for drives with NASCAR and IndyCar, but because a return to F1 was still on the cards at that point, he had to turn it down. But once that F1 ship has sailed for Daniel Ricciardo, whether that's sooner or later, it will eventually happen at some point. It's a very interesting and intriguing prospect seeing Ricciardo race in another series, and especially in the USA. As I mentioned, he certainly has the influence and interest to do it. And being the fourth most popular F1 driver on social media, this has surely got to be an asset for NASCAR going forward and quite a interesting prospect for them. And he's always been very complimentary of motorsport in America. Whenever you see him at American Grand Prix, he's always absolutely buzzing. He has the handlebar mustache sometimes, and it's almost like he's at his second home. And he'd probably even enjoy it a little bit more than the hefty F1 schedule. And he wouldn't even be the first F1 driver to have a go either, with previously guys like Kimi Räikkönen, Jenson Button and Danny Kvyat all have a go. And if he decided to do it, there's a team specially made for this sort of thing called Project 91. Okay, it's time to take these things off now. Now, in order to expand its international reach, since 2022, NASCAR team Trackhouse Racing has fielded a part-time number 91 Chevrolet entry to international drivers who fancy having a go part-time, hence the name Project 91. Basically kind of like a free trial before you commit to it fully. Kimi Räikkönen drove for Project 91 for a handful of races in 2022 and 2023. Admittedly, he didn't set the world alight, but I think he did this more out of curiosity and also because he's Kimi Räikkönen as well. Whether he had that core interest that Ricciardo has, I don't know, but I do sense that he could make a home for himself there. Now, to be honest, we rarely see ex-F1 drivers succeeding or even doing well in NASCAR, but that's mainly because they've been driving on a part-time basis. The last full-time crossover was Juan Pablo Montoya, who made his way over from Formula One, and he did pretty well. He succeeded, he won a handful of races, and showed that ultimately it can be done. Actually, I'm going to put the sunglasses back on because I'm quite enjoying them. An alternative option in the States could be IndyCar, because this is where we find a lot more ex-F1 drivers winding up because it has a lot more in common, open wheel racing and everything. And the thing is, drivers who have achieved less, massively less than Ricciardo, have gone to IndyCar and actually made a name for themselves. So it's intriguing to think what he could do if he made that jump and if he was brave enough to race on the ovals. And if he properly applied himself, an Indy 500 victory would be a great addition alongside his Monaco Grand Prix win. But he has maintained in the past that he's not keen on doing the IndyCar ovals. But, as we've seen with F1 so far this season, anything can happen. You never know, by entrenching himself within IndyCar, more specifically with Andretti, he could find himself back in F1 at some capacity if they ever get the approval to get a team on the F1 grid. It's a massive long shot, I know, but if Andretti did ever get onto the grid and they needed someone just to help get things off the ground and maybe get Colton Herta into Formula One, you never know. And it doesn't stop there either, because I'm sure V8 supercars in Australia constantly have the door open to Daniel Ricciardo. I bet they'd love him to have a go. But also what is an interesting possibility is that he could even remain in the Red Bull fold, much in a similar way as David Coulthard has. And he could hatch another little plan. Red Bull have their new Ford partnership starting in 2026, and Ford are big players in NASCAR as well as V8 supercars. So it's all connected there, and that could in turn open a few doors for him. I just really hope that when Ricciardo finishes his F1 career, it's done with his head held high. Now, the thing is, I just find it fascinating when ex-F1 drivers continue racing in other series. It's exciting, it's great to see, and it's been done countless times over the decades, and whichever series that driver goes to, it kind of gives it a lift a little bit. I'm not saying that these other series are massively less than Formula One, but having someone like Daniel Ricciardo, as I said, 4th most popular F1 driver on social media, that has got to be a boost. And so eventually Ricciardo will have his last race in F1. And since he doesn't seem like the type to return to the sofa, I sincerely do hope he does give NASCAR a try once he's done with Formula One. So there you go. What do you think is going to happen to Daniel Ricciardo as the season ends? Is he going to remain in F1? Is he going to go to another series? Will he wind up in NASCAR? Let me know in the comments. Give that little subscribe button a click, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.